So how do we reach the lost without becoming lost ourselves? Today on the Midweek Move, we're going to talk about that. Hello and welcome to the Midweek Move, podcast extension of the Healing Place, the podcast where we examine scriptures line by line, verse by verse, and ask ourselves what is happening here today, ladies and gentlemen. Pastor Scott and I are continuing our conversation through the book of Mark. And Pastor, I'm excited. We've had some really great conversations already. I think we're about 7 weeks into the book of Mark. We're only in chapter 2.
But wait a second. We don't do line by line.
Exactly. Genuinely, I love this format. For those of you who don't know, we do a church-wide Bible study here at the church. Or not Bible study, but Bible reading plan. And it's through YouVersion. But we purposely choose ones that break things up because we want people to absorb what they're actually getting. And so that's the reason why we're not doing whole chapters, whole books at one time, because you guys aren't absorbing it. And we want to encourage you, absorb what we're doing today, and then let us know what the Lord is speaking to you through this. Reach out to us, mediahub@thpshreveport.com. Find us at thpshreveport.com, our website, and let us know what the Lord is doing through your life, through these passages, through these small, bite-sized chunks that we're going through together. So let's take a bite, Pastor. That segue.
Take a bite. It reminds me of McGruff.
The crime dog?
The crime dog. Take a bite out of crime.
Is he still around? I don't know.
I don't know if that was, I think I was a teenager maybe.
I was a kid when I last saw him.
Then I was probably a young adult.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Mark chapter 2, verse 13. Then Jesus went out to the lakeshore again and taught the crowds that were coming to him. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at his tax collector's booth. "Follow me and be my disciple," Jesus said to him. So Levi got up and followed him.
Awesome. So here we see Jesus teaching in a traditional rabbinic way where he's walking and teaching at the same time, which I think is kind of an interesting aspect. We've talked about before about the need of taking people with us as we go and do stuff, doing life with them, teaching them as we go. But he's teaching these people, and as he goes, he comes across a man named Levi, who we know also as Matthew. But why is it such a big deal that Jesus called out to Levi, this tax collector, to come follow him, Pastor?
Well, this is one of those questions that we could go on forever, or it could just be very simple.
Right.
The reason why it's such a big deal in this context, tax collectors, if you look from the Roman side of it, they were a necessity for the Romans to ensure that the Jews their taxes were collected.
Right.
To the Jews, Levi, although quote unquote one of them, would have been looked upon as one who was robbing his own people. And so if you go to Israel, I've been many times, and we would go out to Galilee, and every single time we would go out there, one of our guides would say something about, up on that hillside right there, as you come from the north and you're coming to Jerusalem, then you would have passed through that area right there, and there would have been a tax collector there. And they would say something like, okay, so Levi would have been right there. And so in order to get to Jerusalem, they would collect your taxes.
Right.
And so to the Jews, Levi, Matthew, would have been looked at as a traitor,
right,
of sorts, because tax collectors were also known for not just collecting the tax of whoever the rulers were, but they were also known to take a little extra for themselves. And so they would have been looked at as thieves. They would have been looked at as, breakers, quote unquote, of the law.
Right.
And so it was kind of a no-win scenario, because tax collectors were looked at as taking a little bit more for themselves, which for the Romans would have been sometimes unto death. That would have been unto death, because it would have been stealing from the Romans. But then to the Jews, it was, how dare you, work for the Romans? How dare you even tax us and take from us? So they would have, it makes sense of why it says over and over why Jesus is looked down upon, eating with tax collectors and sinners.
Right.
That's why it's such a big deal.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. It does. And honestly, when I was reading through it made me kind of think about some other aspect of like how he treated the tax collectors, treated Levi, versus how he treated another group of people who were taking a little bit off the top, which were the people in the temple who were selling doves aspects for sacrifice. It wasn't just a matter of he was angry that they were selling stuff in the church or in the temple, but it was a matter that they were price gouging people.
And that defiling worship.
Exactly.
As they did it.
And it's one of those things I was thinking about is like, he expects the world and people who are doing worldly things to act like the world, but when we're in the church, he does hold people up to a higher standard on certain things. And so he's looking at Levi. He's like, this is a lost sheep, and he's doing as the world does. I'm sure Levi probably thought, well, we all charge more for other people because that's just what he's always known that he had to do. Was it shady? Yes. He probably knew it was wrong, but he figured we just do it.
But it's also under duress too, because you're under Roman rule, and so you're forced. If you were in that area of occupation at all, you were forced by the Roman government to take from your very own people.
Right.
And so he was really in a no-win situation. He may not have been the greatest, most upright man, but he was also left with very little decision of his own.
Right.
More being forced to be a tax collector than, hey, I want to be a tax collector. And we also see that, and we're not going to get deep into this, but we see this with the Jewish people moving forward throughout not just decades, but centuries, throughout the centuries. And we see these areas of giftedness of which they had being used as an opportunity to rule over them, to denigrate them, to besmirch them, to make them feel less than. And these giftings of finance and administration, and these giftings being used sometimes by entire societies and cultures,
right,
to be able to put Jews in a corner, and then also to force them to do things under duress,
right,
within culture, even coming from the church itself.
Right.
And we'll not get too deep into that, but
that's another conversation for another day.
it is, but it helps you to look at a passage like this, not just you look at it in the context of this and what we're talking about. Why would a tax collector be looked at, especially by Jewish people, as less than? We know now, but if you fast forward this throughout the history of the world, then you begin to find out that it actually is used to bring persecution to the Jews. It's also used and would be used in the future tense all the way to the 20th century,
right,
for an extinguishing of the Jews as a people.
Right.
And that's true.
Yeah.
That's not speculation. That's
right.
That is history that backs that up.
Exactly.
I know that got really deep.
No, it's all good.
But that's what should happen when we read the Word of
right.
God, is that we read it in context and we get the historical viewpoint of it, but we also move from that point. And how did this then move and become a part of culture and society? And
right.
how was it used in a good way, and how was it used in a bad way moving forward throughout history?
Definitely.
All right, verse 15. Later, Levi invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. There were many people of this kind among Jesus' followers. But when the teachers of the religious law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with tax collectors and other sinners, they asked his disciples, why does he eat? Now, this is New Living Translation. Why does he eat with such scum? What does the New King James Version say?
Well, I'm using the ESV.
What does the ESV say?
It says, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?
Okay. A New Living says, why does he eat with such scum? When Jesus heard this, he told them, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. And what does the ESV say on that?
It says, when Jesus heard it, he said to them, those who are well have no need for a physician, but those who are sick, I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. So, all right, so Levi invites Jesus back and his disciples to his home to have a meal with his associates that are apparently scum. And this causes a large commotion in the religious leadership right there. And Jesus gives a pretty profound statement here that, again, it's one of those things that it's a no-duh moment, I think. It's one of those things you go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And that is this whole aspect about a physician he's not there for healthy people. He's there for people who are sick. So with that being said, without a doubt, we have to reach the lost. That's period. That's literally our job. Go into the world and make disciples. That was what Jesus' command to us. And at the same time, we can't assume the lost will always come to us. They're not always going to come through the doors of our church just on a whim. We have to do something to go out and reach them.
Nor should churches be built that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is one of the issues that we come up against in the 21st century church, is that the church being formed and fashioned for that explicit purpose, when really it's to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry and
to go out themselves.
That's right, to go out themselves.
Yeah. So, but then we have to, that whole aspect going out to people. Some people take this verse though, and they've used it as an excuse to put themselves in compromising situations. To like, well, I'm going to reach the lost, and they put themselves in a place where they're not equipped to handle that, they're not prepared to handle that, or perhaps it's just flat out a sinful thing that is hurting them. How do we find a balance in reaching the lost but keeping ourselves above board and in a healthy place?
Well, not in numeric order,
right,
but discernment, number one.
Right.
You know, there are some times that the Lord has led me into some pretty wicked places, and the discernment that I have in my own spirit of the Holy Spirit was saying, yes, you're supposed to get in this. You're supposed to go there.
Right.
Either to grab somebody out of a situation or to minister to a group of people or whatever it may have been. Then there were other times where there was a check in my own spirit that was like, no, this is probably not the most healthy thing for you now. Not that I would go into sin or fall into sin or anything like that, but discernment, I think, is a huge part of it.
Right. Again,
not in numeric order, but I also think there's a balance of knowing where you're at, knowing, not everyone that was a drug addict should go back to a drug house to try to win drug addicts.
Right.
It could be you're putting yourself in a place where doors are open that may have been closed off to protect you. And it's not always, you're not always supposed to go back to where you came from. Just because you did drugs doesn't mean that you're going to only be reaching drug addicts.
Right.
Just because you've never done drugs doesn't mean that you're not going to lead a drug addict to Jesus. I mean, we've really made this thing so convoluted that it's almost like we put people in these categories, which humanity loves to do, and the spirit of the world loves to do, because those categories will then separate us from one another. It's all walls, where Jesus came to break down all those walls, not just Jew and Gentile, but to break down all those walls.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is like we think, well, just because I went through this, that means that I can go back and I can reach somebody who's in that. And that's not always the case.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, discernment, knowing where you're at in your maturity level in Christ, where you're at in the level of even being a witness. I mean, maybe you're not the one to lead them to the Lord.
Yeah.
Maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's somebody who doesn't even come from that past.
Right.
Maybe the person that's going to lead the tax collector to Jesus is not even a tax collector. They have no idea about it. They don't know anything about it.
Right.
But it's just the fact that they've been chosen to point the way to Jesus. So again, I think also what you're intimating with this question is that sometimes people, because they want to do things, certain behaviors, they say, I'm called to whatever. In my opinion, I'm not going to reach an alcoholic by becoming an alcoholic.
Right.
It's just
doesn't make sense. The
true alcoholic's not going to find Jesus because of my horrible behavior.
Right.
Like, that's not a witness to get them to Jesus.
Right.
I don't have to smoke pot, or I don't have to be a drug addict, or I don't have to, whatever, just name it, whatever it is. I don't have to do those things to reach people, because that's not the thing that's going to reach them. The thing that's going to reach them is they're going to be drawn by the Spirit of God,
right?
Which is what I need to have,
right,
in my witness. my testimony might lead people to Jesus, but it's going to be the Spirit that compels them to come to Jesus.
Yeah.
Not my story necessarily, but the Spirit of God is going to use my story to draw people. But it's going to be the Spirit that draws.
Exactly.
And so I think people get into this saying, if I wear a certain thing, you know, you deal with this all the time, you know, dealing with fringe communities. And, you know, like I don't know a lot of the lingo of a lot of people that you minister to. I told you the other day, I jumped on one of the things you were doing, the podcast you were doing. I had no clue what you guys were talking about, zero clue.
Right.
But as I was watching, then the two guys that I don't even know, and they were talking about things I had no clue about. You guys were using terminology I had no. You weren't speaking in tongues, but to me you were. But I was looking at all of you, and I was just praying for you. I was praying for all of you in that moment. I didn't have to jump into the chat. I didn't have to. I have no clue what's going on.
Right.
But if I was to step into that, I wouldn't have to know what was going on to reach that person.
Right.
The Spirit of God can still draw those people to Himself. That's the main issue, is that the Spirit of God. So again, I think you need to know who you are. You need to know where you're at with Jesus.
Right.
You need to know your boundaries, your guardrails, man.
Yeah.
Like, you just don't need to go there.
Right.
Like, you don't even need to put yourself, you can, but why would you unless the Spirit of God was drawing you into that?
Exactly. And I think about David Wilkerson. A couple of years ago, I read the book. I read the book. I did the audio book of The Cross and the Switchblade. Yeah. And David Wilkerson, if you guys don't know the story, he's the guy that created Teen Challenge, which is a huge program that's literally pulling people out of drugs and alcohol and just restoring lives. And but if you read his story, he's just a country preacher, grew up in the countryside, and God calls him to inner city to minister to people who are struggling. And
gangs.
I mean, and it's scary stuff. And the Lord's leading him.
Latino gangs in New York City.
Yeah.
Who have been convicted.
Yeah.
And are on trial.
Right.
And here's this skinny, white, suited up preacher, and he goes to New York City, and in the story he talks about how it was failure, and he goes back to, I think, Pennsylvania, and then he was like, no, the Lord wouldn't leave him alone, and he would be up all night long, and he goes back in, and of course he connects with Nikki Cruz, and man, if you've not gotten into that whole story of how that all happened, you need to check that out.
Yeah.
And then even the life of Nikki Cruz after that.
Oh, yeah.
And then how Nikki Cruz becomes an evangelist, man, just telling people about Jesus everywhere. But you're right. He was the polar opposite of what you think should go into that situation. But he was the person that God called to that situation. He didn't have to, knife fights were a big deal back then. He didn't have to, brandish his knife. Knives were pulled on him, when they were having prayer meetings and stuff, and they were doing all this stuff. But he was the polar opposite of what you would think could step into that situation and lead people to Jesus. Right. But he was the appointed person to do that.
Exactly. But everything he did was with discernment. It was understanding his boundaries. And he did it with accountability. Every time he went over there, he had his wife knew what was happening, and he had a team of people who knew where he was going to make sure everything was above board at all times.
And I'll tell you what, you want to lose respect from people, try to be something you're not.
Yeah.
Like if I go to a geek con, I mean, I'm just going to use that as an example just because that's your world.
Right.
But if I go to a geek con and I dress up and I try to be something and I'm trying to be whatever, it's going to come off as so disingenuous.
Right.
But if I go and I'm asking a bunch of people questions, genuinely wanting to know and learn, then that's going to come off as very genuine.
Right.
Because I just want to know. I'm not trying to fit in.
Right.
I'm not trying to be something I'm not. I just am who I am.
Right.
And I just want to learn, I want to grow, or I want to talk to you, or I want to, help you in however I can. Right. And I think what ends up happening is people think they have to be something or be cool or man, I have to relate to them to reach them. Not really.
No.
I mean, if you're the person that's supposed to be a witness to them, then you're the person no matter what the past experience.
Right.
And what I found a lot of times is that the people that I thought that I would connect with, man, I'm really going to reach them because of my story, I wasn't the person.
Right.
But then somebody who was raised totally different from me ends up being a person that something I say or something about my story or whatever reaches them, and then they come to Jesus. So I don't. But again, I think a lot of times people use, like, if I want to drink and put it under the grace of God, I'm just going to use that as an example. Nobody get mad or upset or start flipping tables or anything. And so I think that if I want to drink and I want to get drunk or whatever, then I can go, hey, man, I feel called to go to the bars.
Yeah.
Well,
Start a Christian brewery.
That's not your calling. That's your preference of behavior.
Right.
And that God's not gonna do anything with that.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Wow, we brought up a lot there.
We did.
Verse 18?
Yes, sir.
All right. Once when John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, some people came to Jesus and asked, why don't your disciples fast like John's disciples and the Pharisees do? Jesus replied, do wedding guests fast while celebrating with the groom? Which were we doing here?
We were going to do verse 18 as a setup. Go ahead and do verse 20 also.
Okay. Of course not. They can't fast while the groom is with them, but someday the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast.
All right, cool. So what's taking place here now? For context, the law, the Pentateuch, it only requires 1 day of fasting, which is the Day of Atonement. After the exile, Jews there were 4 more fasts that were set up for the Jews, and they kind of took place during different feasts and stuff like that, or different festivals. And currently, in this time frame, the Pharisees fasted twice a week. The people asking this question in this passage, they were likely strongly influenced by the Pharisees, and they saw the twice a week fasting as a sign of their piety, of their commitment to the Lord. And so they see Jesus as people not fasting twice a week. And as we know from other passages, they were very public about their fasting. They were very like, oh gosh, I'm hungry. Just making a scene about it. And so they're just generally like how do we know you're actually committed to the Lord? You're not fasting like these other people are doing. So Jesus answers the question in a parable style, pointing out that fasting was a sign of mourning, and that as long as he's with them, there was no need to do so. And he's using this conversation about a wedding and the bridegroom and stuff like that, which we, on this backside of things, we see it as a conversation of the greater aspect of Jesus, the bridegroom, the wedding feast of the Lamb, everything like that. But this aspect of there's a time when he won't be there with them. They won't have their bridegroom with them. Is this verse something we can point out that suggests that Jesus was more than aware of his death and resurrection coming up?
Well, a couple of things in here. Number one, Jesus is not saying not to fast.
Right.
Because in Matthew 6, he's clear that when you give, when you pray,
right,
when you fast. And so he's not necessarily rebuking fasting and saying, okay, you should never fast because I'm still alive.
Right.
Fasting is still throughout the Gospels and the New Testament was a discipline of the faith. And so, Jesus is, again, he's doing it in parabolic form, which a lot of times he would say things in parables, and he's not saying don't do these things. He's saying when you do these things, think about this. It's all about the heart. It's about the spirit. What he was rebuking them for in Matthew 6 was just what you said, is they would make these grand prayers so everybody would see them and hear their words and be impressed.
Right.
That's not what prayer is supposed to be. When they gave, they wanted to make sure everybody knew they were giving.
Right.
So they would think they were awesome. When they fasted, they would look horrible. They would be terrible. Oh, I'm hungry.
Right.
Da, 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 da. It's like, oh, bless your heart. You're so amazing. You're so awesome.
Right.
They're drawing attention to themselves. Jesus is saying that's not what fasting is. And so there did come a point, and it's in the different gospel accounts, we know that, you can't necessarily look at all 4 and go click, 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 because it's all coming from different places. But there is a moment in the Gospels where Jesus begins to talk about his death and resurrection, and he had not done it up to that point. And a lot of times you will find that at Caesarea Philippi, where he establishes who he is as the Son of God, which is in the north, And then they begin to actually make their way back toward Jerusalem. And it's almost like there was this shift that took place, and he began to talk about his death and resurrection. He was very careful not to up to a point.
Right.
But then also he begins to use things to point towards his imminent death and resurrection. And it shows up in his parables. It shows up in his teaching. He's trying to give them a heads up, but at the same time, he'll tell them, you don't know what I'm saying right now. It's a mystery to you, but you will know.
Right.
And the Holy Spirit will remind you of everything I've taught you. And so I do think there is evidence here to suggest that not only is he aware of his death and his imminent resurrection, but he's beginning to let it leak out a little bit.
Right.
Not so they're going to understand it, because they won't until he's actually gone.
Right.
But so that they can go back to what he's taught them,
Right.
and the Holy Spirit will remind them, and they will go, oh, do you remember? And we see that through the book of Acts and all through.
Yeah.
Hey, do you remember when we were with him?
Right.
Bop, 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 bop. Which should be the same thing for us.
Exactly.
Like something will happen in our lives and we don't understand what happened. We get on the other side of it and we go, oh, okay, that's what that was.
Yeah.
That's why that happened.
Exactly.
We start to get understanding of it. So yes, I believe that not only is he aware of his death and resurrection, but he's beginning to kind of put it out just a little bit to his followers.
So I just want to make this clear for you guys. To date, then, we have Jesus already kind of hinting at the fact that he was aware of his death and upcoming resurrection, but also previously, he also mentioned, he gave reference to the fact that he was divine. He was God. And again, these are claims that people have refuted. They're saying, well, they're just making it up as they went. We have documentations that Jesus knew exactly what was taking place this entire time. So, all right, cool beans. All right, Pastor, 21 through 22, sir.
Besides, who would patch old clothing with new cloth? For the new patch would shrink and rip away from the old cloth, leaving an even bigger tear than before. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, for the wine would burst the wineskins, and the wine and the skins would both be lost. New wine calls for new wineskins.
All right, so Jesus gives two more parable-like examples of what he's talking about here. In the old wineskins and the old garments, he says that it's inappropriate to use new wine in old wineskins because it would naturally just destroy the skin of that they're putting it in. And putting a new patch on an old garment, well, when it shrinks because it's going to get wet or whatever, you're going to clean it, it's going to tear the old garment up even more. So that's kind of what he's giving out. So my question for you, Pastor, is this is kind of it feels like a weird jump to talk about this. What is Jesus trying to say with these two parables about wineskin and patching in the context of this whole aspect of, this, here we are, we're fasting, and he's telling them, look, the bridegroom's with them. They don't need to fast at the moment. Like, what is he trying to point them to here? Yeah,
well, I think that it also goes to future tense.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think we can look at everything that Jesus was teaching. It had a contextualization in the moment, but it always has a forethought to what's ahead. Right. Always. He's always teaching what's ahead, what's ahead, what's ahead. Because he knew that he was going to be gone. And he knew that they were going to struggle with that.
Right.
And he knew that everybody who was following him in this moment was not going to end up following him.
Right.
That they were putting parameters on following him. As long as he's doing miracles, signs, and wonders, man, I'm all in.
Right.
But once we start talking about death, going to a cross, and you got to eat my flesh and you got to drink my blood, I'm out, man.
People are checking out on that.
I mean,
one.
I love you, but dude, I'm gone, And so even with this, he is allegorically putting it with the new man. Is that in order for the Holy Spirit to be poured out into us,
right,
there has to be a new man.
Right.
There has to be belief and confession. He lays it all out throughout it. But in order for new wine to come in, it's got to have a new wineskin.
Right.
Again, it doesn't mean that we're perfect when we come to Jesus, but it means that we submit ourselves. We are going to repent,
right,
turn, and in him now we are a new creation in Christ Jesus.
Exactly.
Which gives us a new wineskin. For what? New wine, which throughout the Word of God is akin to the Holy Spirit,
right,
that new wine. And whether it be fresh oil, water, wine, fire, whatever, the Spirit of God is shown in all of those things. So it even is comparative to us to make sure that this, and Paul even goes in to talk about it, like if you were a thief, then guess what? In this new man, you don't steal anymore.
Right.
Or you're still a thief.
Right.
You haven't created a new wineskin. And so even with us, with our bodies, with our soul, with our minds. We bring ourselves to him as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to him, so that we can then receive the new wine. And we use this language all the time. It may not be language that you guys have heard before, but like if we're sensing a certain season that we may be going into, one of the first things that we'll say is, okay, do we have the right wineskin? And what we're saying is, do we have the right template? Do we have the right ingredients to receive what God wants to do today? And this is an amazing illustration for all of you personally. Like if God is calling you into a new season, then one of the things that you need to do is you need to be prepared to receive it.
Right.
A lot of times people aren't prepared to receive what God wants to give them.
Right.
And if you're not prepared to receive it, then you're probably going to either abuse it or you're going to miss it.
Right.
It's one of the reasons why a lot of times, and I know this seems like a stretch, but it's really not. Man, when you look at the percentages of lottery winners, and 5 years after they win the lottery, and you look at the percentage of how many are either back to where they started or worse, the percentages are like in the 90%.
Yeah.
Like 90, 95% or something like that. It's like, oh my gosh, like how? Like you got $10 million, you got $30 million, you got $100 million. How in the world? They were not ready to receive it.
Right.
They had not done. You can see this in entertainment all the time.
Yeah.
People that made hundreds of millions of dollars, bankrupt, nothing. They have nothing. It's because they were not ready to receive it. And I think the question that I ask myself all the time is, I'm asking God to do these things. Am I ready to receive it?
Right.
Like God's ready to give it, but am I ready to receive it? Because that's a wineskin.
Yeah.
You know, if God's going to pour something out, it's got to be in the context of being willing to receive it.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, man. Well, there's a lot of things that Jesus is about to be teaching going forward that there's going to require a new wineskin for people.
Oh.
And again, a lot of what he's teaching here is he's trying to prepare people. He's like, look, things are shifting. Like there's going to be something monumental that he's bringing, that these old traditions that, again, these are what the Pharisees were operating in, were traditions of this twice a week fasting. They're not going to hold what God has for them today. And you feel like you're about to say something.
Yeah, just one more thing. And as you were saying it, I was like, man, I believe one of the things that prevented the Pharisees and the Sadducees from going all in was the fact that they could not prepare. They could not get away from the old wineskin. And that old wineskin was, we're going to let everybody see us. We want it to be known.
Right.
It's about us. It's about me. Well, that was a wineskin.
Yeah.
But it was an old wineskin. And Jesus was trying to get them to a place, not necessarily to receive the new wine, but to change their wineskin.
Right.
No, it's a new way of thinking.
Right.
You got to think differently.
Exactly.
And I think that's the case with a lot of humans.
Yeah.
Is that it's not that God's not ready to pour out new things. It's just the fact that we haven't caught up. We're not willing to change the way that we think.
Right. And when we say new wineskin, we're not talking about getting away from what this says, the biblical standard.
That's right.
It has. But again, we have traditions, we have things we thrown in that for maybe start off with great intentions. You know, fasting twice a week sounds like they had great intentions, but they got away from the point of it.
Yeah, they weren't. The heart was the issue.
Yeah.
They didn't have the right heart in their fasting. Basically, they were missing meals and drawing attention to themselves.
Exactly.
That's not what fasting is.
Absolutely.
Fasting is separating myself from what my flesh wants and submitting that to the Spirit. Taking my mind and my heart off the things below, putting my mind and my heart on things above.
Right. Absolutely. All right, guys, we want to hear from you. How's this encouraged you? Has it challenged you? Reach out to us. MediaHub@thpshreveport.com is how you can email us. Go to the website, thpshreveport.com, and learn more about The Healing Place. And if you're in the Shreveport, Bossier area, come hang out with us every Sunday at 10 o'clock here at The Healing Place. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, have a great week.